This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. Join the union to vote on albums, pick one to discuss with us on the show, get access to bonus episodes, and our private Discord community. Keep the podcast ad-free and make the next episode happen by joining us at digmeoutpodcast.com. All right, Jay, we've got another poll episode. This is from, what is this, August? Is this our August poll?
September.
September? Are we in September? Yeah. What month is it?
Yes, and we're approaching October. We're closer to October than we are August.
Is that what comes next? Okay. All right. Thank you. We had 4 albums suggested for our September poll. And this was an interesting poll. There was no clear popular pick amongst these, unless you are a uber, music nerd in a lot of respects. But
I usually pull them as they come in order, but sometimes I'll massage just a little bit to try to get them balanced so we don't get some album that was much more popular than the other 3.
Sure. We don't want to have an unfair field for the poll.
Yeah, we want to keep them, within the same realm of success, I think.
Exactly.
If possible.
So here's what was suggested for September. Keith Miller suggested Young Lions by Adrian Belew. I think it's pronounced Belew. Mm-hmm. Patrick Testa suggested Nature Film by Scrawl. Eric Peterson suggested the self-titled album by The Dark Fantastic. And Bob Ramakers suggested The Problem With Me by Seam. I believe if you go back to our Bitch Magnet interview with John Fine, you will realize that Seam was related to that band.
Our Bitch Magnet interview.
I remember
we did that.
John Fine had a book out, and he came on. He had been in Bitch Magnet.
Right.
And I believe Seam was one of the other guys that was in the band, went on to form Seam. But what matters is the end result of the polls, both at Patreon and at Substack. You can vote. And the poll results came out like this. Scrawl, 4th place with 13%. Seam, 3rd place with 22%. Tied with Their Dark Fantastic at 22.7 to be precise. We'll make sure we get the precision of the JP Waterhouse, people who tabulate the votes. Just like the Emmys and the Oscars, we use the most respected vote tabulators on the planet. Finally, our winner, Young Lions by Adrian Belew, 40.9%. So a majority, but not a plurality, I guess you'd say.
This is one of those cases where it did much better on Patreon than it did on Substack.
Interesting. Yeah. Over at Patreon, we got some comments. We'll get to those in a moment. But Jay, you knew who Adrian Belew was because he's a famous guitar player, but had you ever listened to any of his solo stuff?
No. I mean, I think I got him confused with Reeves Gabriel's too.
Me too. Yeah.
I know he had some involvement with Bowie, and I knew he was in King Crimson, and I didn't even realize that he had a solo career. I just thought of him as a guitar player, like studio guy, gun for hire type.
Guy who went out on tour with people for, particular records. I knew he had been in a band called The Bears because it had been brought up in our Patreon only community called Discord.
Mm-hmm.
But that was it. I had not listened to The Bears, and I didn't realize that he was from Covington, Kentucky, which is just over the bridge from Cincinnati.
Yeah.
For some reason, I figured Adrian Belew, he's got to be like German or English or something. He's like, like a Robert Fripp type guy. No, the guy's from 2 hours away, which is pretty kind of crazy. And also Adrian's not his real name. His real name is Stephen. Adrian is what he adopted to be a musician. His real name is Robert Stephen Belew. He was born in December of 1949, and as mentioned, from Covington, Kentucky. It's actually, he has an interesting little backstory.
History of the band.
When he's growing up, he starts playing drums in the Ludlow High School marching band. And then he started playing in a cover band called the Denims. But then he got mononucleosis, which can be pretty bad. It can make, you can be bedridden for a while. And he obviously couldn't play drums while he was bedridden. So he starts playing the guitar while he's in bed. And he's listening to like a lot of Jimi Hendrix. But because there's no internet, there's no way to tell how Jimi Hendrix is doing these things. I mean, he's only 17, 18 years old. He's a teenager at this point. He just starts figuring out on the guitar how to do weird sounds using his playing and using some effects pedals, but not really understanding like, oh, Jimi Hendrix recorded that backwards.
Right.
Or Jimmy. So he's figuring things out and making it sound like that, but it's really way more complex than what he's doing.
Yep.
So he had moved to Nashville in 77 or in the mid 70s because he wanted to become a songwriter. And he's playing at a bar and Frank Zappa's chauffeur says, "Hey man, you got to check out this guitar player. He's playing down at this bar in Nashville with his band." And he goes and sees him. He's like, "Holy shit. Like, do you want to be in our band?" He's like, okay. And then like a year later, he finally actually joins the band. For whatever reason, it took time for that to happen. And then he flies him out to LA to do an audition. And there's all these like famous, formally trained musicians that are there. And he's like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I'm not trained. I've never taken a lesson. Like, I just make weird noises. And so he was like really kind of, I guess kind of like, he thought he played bad when he did the audition. So he's like, "Hey man, or Zappa says, why don't you just come to my house and we'll jam? Like, let me see what you can do without the audience and stuff like that." And then he did. And he's like, "Okay, you're in the band." So he plays with Zappa for a couple years. Then, of course, then the stuff starts happening. He starts working with Brian Eno and David Bowie. He plays on the Lodger album. He goes on the Sound and Vision tour in 1990 later. Then Belew formed a band called Gaga, which he starts playing in New York City a lot, and he becomes friends with the Talking Heads, and he essentially starts playing with them. And then I guess he meets Robert Fripp from King Crimson, and he's like, "Hey man, want to come?" So everybody who sees him just goes, "Do you want to join our band?" Right. Essentially. Yeah. Which is pretty cool. I mean, that's an amazing thing for a self-taught guitarist who, is not a name to begin with, and he just sort of works his way up from the Midwest. He ends up playing on with them live.
If Robert Fripp and Frank Zappa ask you to join their band,
you're pretty good company. Yeah. He works with two different Talking Heads members on their solo records, Jerry Harrison and David Byrne. He then ends up talking with Tina Weymouth and Chris France, who they wanted him to replace David Byrne as the frontman, because there was a lot of tension at a certain point in the Talking Heads. We all know it. Like, they went for years without speaking to each other. And he was like, no, I'm not doing that. That would be crazy. And so he ends up going and playing with the Tom Tom Club, which was the project that Tina Weymouth and France had outside. And he played on Genius of Love, which is the big single that everybody knows that ended up getting sampled by Mariah Carey in the 90s. But then there were some like issues with the Talking Heads people. So he goes and makes some other records, and then ends up joining King Crimson, which he is he joined as frontman, second guitarist, and occasional drummer for King Crimson from 81 to 2009, which is longer than anybody except Robert Fripp. Just crazy.
Mm-hmm.
He's still doing stuff with the Talking Heads. Then he ends up jamming with Bill Bruford, who was in Yes, and Tony Levin, and they form a band called Discipline. And then I mean, there's just a ton of people that he's played with. We mentioned the Bears. So the Bears forms in 85. That was with Rob Fetters, who was in a band called the Raisins. Apparently he really liked those names. And then so the Bears put out a couple records, I believe, and then broke up, and then they reformed as the Psychodots because Belew ended up touring with Bowie. There's more. There's a lot more to his career if you want to dig into it. I'm sure he should probably have a book, to be honest. Yeah. Adrian Belew should probably write a book because he's played with everybody. It's insane the amount of musicians and bands and studio albums that he's played on. It's an insane amount. He's played with Herbie Hancock. He's played with Joe Cocker. He's played with Cyndi Lauper, Paul Simon, Mike Oldfield, 9 Inch Nails. He plays on like 4 9 Inch Nails albums and toured with them.
I remember that. Yeah.
He played on William Shatner's album Has Been, where he did the cover of Pulp's Common People. He's played with Porcupine Tree, wasn't that like that progressive English band with Steve Wilson? So the dude is just everywhere, but it's crazy because you probably ask the average person on the street, they have no idea who he is. He's just one of those guys, and he clearly is not. I mean, from this, it doesn't seem like he would be like a big ego or personality guy because you don't really hear about him. He's just a guy who constantly works and kind of works with a lot of people, which says to me like people like to work with him. Yeah, if he was a dick, people wouldn't want to work with him.
And he's probably, well, you can tell from the resume, very flexible too. So kind of person you bring into a project, you probably get a lot of value out of it.
When I said Discipline, I meant that was the first King Crimson album he played on, which was in 1981, and he played up until The Power to Believe in 2003. Anyway, that's a lot of Adrian Belew. Please go and read more about him because he's got a ton of
would also credits. Be a good subject for a documentary.
Absolutely.
To be able to trace that, have all those characters coming in. And I think later on, he's recently been into like developing his own software for recording guitars and stuff. Pretty crazy.
And he's like Eddie Van Halen and Tom Morello in that he would use the guitar in ways that people like. He took a file and rubbed it on the strings to get weird sounds. And he would actually mess with the frets to get different intonations. So he was somebody who was not just interested in like the notes, but the actual physical guitar and like, how can I alter it to make new sounds? He also was a pioneer of guitar synthesizers. He started using those, a Roland GR 300 when like Andy Summers and Robert Fripp started to get into those. And he has a signature guitar now. So if you want to pick up a Parker Fly, that's his signature guitar. Our folks over at Patreon, they had some comments, and quite a few people went with Belew. Let's read some comments here. It's Jeremy Amend said, I'd like to know why Young Lions Here and a few other albums in Adrian Belew's discography around that time are not streaming at all. That being said, I'm voting for Scene because I can't remember it at all. And reading John Fine's book, Your Band Sucks, almost persuaded me to revisit it. Scott Witt said, the Zappa fan in me has to choose Adrian Belew. It's funny how so many Frank Zappa ended up doing really good pop songs. I guess people who play with Frank Zappa. Eric Peterson, The Dark Fantastic, which he suggested. I didn't mention that there's a tie-in to the three major bands of the Seattle scene. Not one of the big four, but a band that was arguably the fifth big Seattle band. What's the fifth? Candlebox? What's the fifth big Seattle band? Mudhoney? I mean, in terms of sales,
Alice in Chains? Or
well,
you
no,
consider
because
the
Alice would
fourth?
be the big four: Alice,
Okay.
Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Nirvana. What's the fifth one? What would you consider to be the fifth big band out of there? That's the thing.
Mm,
Like, and what are you going by? Reputation, influence, sales. Eric, you're going to need to expand on that after you hear this. Jim Copany said, "Gotta be Belew. I saw him on the Sound and Vision tour where they played Pretty Pink Rose off this album. Also, the Bears, Talking Heads, Zappa, King Crimson. So much to talk about with Belew." That's right, Jim. You're correct. Willie Dillon says, "It seems that Belew is seemingly the only one I seem to want to see reviewed." How alliterative of you, Billy. Ian McIver said, "Adrian Belew for me." And Gavin said, "A weird one here for me. As always, congrats to the suggesters for the obscure picks. I'd heard none of these. I like Adrian and Scrawl a fair bit. I've chosen Adrian Belew as it's all over the place and should make a fun discussion. As an album, I almost turned it off a few times as it goes in strange places, but I hung in there due to his keen sense of melody." Well, that is the definition of a music fan right there. Sticking with
hanging in
it
there.
when it's like, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
And then coming around to it, letting yourself experience the weirdness and accepting it. So let's talk about Young Lions, which I don't even think I mentioned. It came out in May of 1990. So it just got in there, a couple months into 1990. It was released on Atlantic, produced by Adrian Belew. It features David Bowie on 2 tracks. Track 2, Pretty Pink Rose, which was mentioned. They did that on tour together. And then Gunman, which is track 10. Ted Jensen, which is a name that's come up a lot. He did the mastering on this record. And most of the other people I don't know. The only thing I'll say is there's a spoken word song on track 5.
I Am What I Am.
I Am What I Am. That is Omega Townsend, born August 1927, died February of 1992. He went by the name Prophet Omega, and he was a weekly radio televangelist in Nashville, Tennessee on WNAH in the 70s. He was the founder of the Peaceway Temple, and he became known for recordings of his sermons, which became popular among musicians in the 80s. And then he was a prophet circuit. So he went out and, did the circuit of like revivalism and tents and stuff like that. He also worked as a carnival worker. It's fascinating that his music, or not his music, but his sermons got passed around, and then Adrian Belew ends up hearing it and using it, which I guess because he was there in the 70s, he probably heard it on the radio while this guy was there.
I think he's based in Nashville too, now at least.
He was. He passed away.
No.
Oh, Adrian Belew? Got
yes.
it, yes. Adrian Belew's fine. Prophet Omega.
He lives in Nashville and may have lived there for a while. I don't know.
The Prophet Omega sounds like a science fiction book from the 1950s that would have like a very cool robot driven or drawn on the cover. The Prophet Omega by Isaac Asimov. All right, let's get in the record. Young Lions, Adrian Belew. Jay, tell me what works for you on this album.
Well, I came in knowing a bit about him as a guitar player and knowing, he's very inventive, sort of a versatile hired gun type, played at a high level of, musicianship. I had no idea I was going to hear the songwriting that I heard. So I think what works best is just there's some great pop songs on here. Like, I just did not expect that. I was coming in thinking it would be kind of an indulgent, kind of eccentric instrumental album, maybe with some spoken word vocals, but you get full on, like, to me, they sound like a mix of like ELO, Jeff Lynne, and David Bowie material here. Really great vocals. I had no idea he was this good of a singer. I mean, yes, David Bowie sings on a couple songs, but like, he sings just as well as David Bowie does. I mean, he's got his own voice. He has a great range. Um, I think what got me, I think what captured my attention on the record so much was that it just reminded me of how you can write really hooky melodic music that's, is accessible, but use more than the same four chords. He's, using diminished chords and these changes that, when the song starts, it sets a particular frame and a particular mood. But then there's this chord change that's going to happen on all this stuff. It's maybe it's the second half of the verse or transition from the verse to the chorus that suddenly everything shifts, right? The whole picture like tilts 90 degrees and the mood changes, the feeling of the song, where you're going and where the song going, everything suddenly it's like you're looking at a kaleidoscope and it all changes to a different color. And it's all because of these really clever, you know, chord changes that were very common in 70s and 80s pop music, but through the 90s and 2000s, and particularly now, we've lost them. And like every pop song is written with the same four chords, which is, for anybody who's listened to the music from the past, is like painfully dull. So it was just so exciting to hear someone, be unabashedly, having a pop sensibility and purpose here. This is not a King Crimson record, but bringing a sophistication of that type of music to 3 and 4 minute long pop songs. Uh, there's great hooks. Pretty Pink Rose is I don't know, that's a classic Bowie jam to me. That sounds like a David Bowie, Mott the Hoople 70s glam song, but, kind of done in his own way. But like, it's just a great vocal hook in the verse of that line, and the chorus is great. Heartbeat starts with the chorus, in a very kind of 80s pop songwriting direction. Great work with the guitar and the vocal. They're sort of developing the hook together. Looking for UFO is just like, I don't know how that wasn't a hit song. That just, to me, sounds like, a hit from the 80s that I just had never heard. Men in Helicopters sounds like ELO meets the New Pornographers. Like it's just this really sharp, fun, but like lyrically very hard hitting and witty. I just was blown away by some of the songs here. I think the last thing I'll say on that is that it's a very colorful album. Like it's bright, it has personality from everything. Like the vocals have personality, the guitar playing obviously has tons of personality. He's doing all of the stuff you would expect, like making weird noises with the guitar, atmospherics, playing really like, clever rhythm parts, doing really cool leads that had these unique effects on them. It's layered, but it feels like organic and performed. It doesn't get overly dense and sterile through the layering. It actually stays like very vibrant and alive and human sounding, which I think is probably due to the fact that this is all being performed. It's not, he might be using synth effects on the guitar or whatever, but it's all being played with hands, and it's not overly loopy or using, even, keyboard synthesizers. It's all like pianos and guitars and interesting effects, but it's all performance. And then there's just some really also, like, from a drum standpoint, the color comes through because he moves from using, you know, kits, straightforward drum kits to these like percussion effects and layering. And it's done super seamlessly, like throughout the songs. Like, you'll go from a percussion part to a straight drum kit part to a hybrid of the two. And it's never abrupt. Like, it always just feels like, oh, this mood just shifted. And you realize, like, oh, wait a minute, he just pulled the kit out and now it's all toms. And like, there's even like on You're Not Alone, he switches the snare sound in the middle of the song. Like, who does that? You can't do that. That's illegal. That's against
That's
the
rules.
music police. Like, you can't just change the snare sound, but between the parts, like, he uses a different snare or he layers on top another snare, and it, in the context of this song, is super effective because it just suddenly you go from one mood to another, this much more punchy snare sound that kind of cracks and like grabs your attention and shifts your focus to other instruments. It's something that I would never think to do, but like, it works great. So I think the last part of that is just these work as songs despite all the creativity, because it's just so seamless. It's when you actually break down what all's going on here, it's kind of mind blowing. Some of the things that the sounds and techniques being used, you put on headphones, you really analyze it, but you can also just put this on. And to me, it just read like an ELO album, or even like parts of it felt like Jellyfish or Hall and Oates. You know what I mean? It's just like super, parts of it were just like, oh, this is just a pop song. And then when you break it down, you're like, oh, wow, wait a minute. That's super weird. That chord change is not typical. I'm like, is that a whale? What the hell was that? So it's, I think, comes down to the songs for me on this. And I was blown away by the quality of them. How about you? What worked?
Well, I need to say before I get started, there are two covers on here. I don't know if you know that they're covers.
No, didn't.
Heartbeat is a King Crimson song.
Okay.
So and he brought in the guys from King Crimson play on it,
Okay.
which is a weird thing to do, I guess, but whatever. I think he did because it says that it's in the credits. And then You're Not Alone is a Traveling Wilburys song that he recorded because Roy Orbison had passed away, and he did it as a tribute. And when I heard that, I go, okay, that makes sense, because he kind of sounds like a cross between David Byrne and Roy Orbison on that, which also clicked with me. Like, oh, this is why Tina Weymouth and Chris France wanted him in Talking Heads, because he sounds like David Byrne at times. He's got that.
But it also sounds
tone.
like, the Traveling Wilburys songs have a heavy ELO, Jeff Lynne influence on them. Obviously, he's writing and producing that stuff. So to me, it's not, that's what it sounded like to me. I was like, this sounds like Traveling Wilburys, but like the Jeff Lynne, heavier stuff.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I was wrong. Heartbeat he just plays on it. The other guys just have songwriting credits. Anyway, this was a crazy record to listen to without any context of his other solo work, because when I got it, it came up as progressive rock. So I'm like, all right. And then you listen to it, you go, yeah, it's progressive in certain ways, but it's also just super poppy. And like you said, Looking for a UFO, which is like one of the highlights of the album, is like a classic ELO kind of feel. It's
Sounds
bright,
like
it's
Blue
bouncy,
Sky.
it's very Mr. Blue Sky, exactly. And then you follow that right with I Am What I Am, which is the prophet talking about I mean, it's actually a really interesting monologue and very progressive for a prophet, but it's part of this whole thing that's happening on this record where you just don't know what's going to happen. Like, oh, next David Bowie's going to show up and sing this amazing, single that should have been a big hit that wasn't. And then you get like, Phone Call from the Moon. That could have been a like you said, like a Hall and Oates album track. And then you get Gunman, which sounds like it almost. I had to look back, but this is around the time of Tin Machine for David Bowie,
Yeah.
which is with Reeves Gabriel,
Mhm.
the other guy that we
Yeah.
were talking about as far as a guitar player. So you can hear like Bowie wanting to do like just different things.
Mhm.
He'd been David Bowie for so long, and I think the last Bowie album in the '80s, Is It Tonight? I think that one was not a big success. Um, so this is before him hooking up with Trent Reznor and sort of revitalizing his career in the '90s with the more electronic stuff like Outside and what have you. So this is such a weird period, but you hear a song like Gunman, you're like, oh man, this is the Bowie with like some fire and some snarl, and he does this like thing about drugs and there's just like crazy lyrics where you're like, that's David Bowie, like that's just him
Yeah.
riffing, and it's just so much fun combined with all the weird guitar stuff. And like you said, there's rhythmic stuff that's really weird, like on Small World, and it somehow all melds together because I guess he has a very deft touch as a producer. And at this point he's been in a ton of bands and played with a bunch of musicians over the last like 15 years. So, and this is not his first solo album. I mean, he'd been putting out solo albums for a while. I did see when I was trying to do some research, this is not beloved. It's
Really?
like the opposite. A lot of the big progressive fans heard this and went, what is this pop music?
Yeah.
Now, I wonder in retrospect if some of those reviews were written by people at the time who now go back and go, okay, I see what he was doing and it's enjoyable. But hearing this out of the context of the rest of his solo career or the Bears or Gaga or any of that other stuff, it's a really engaging album that I was just completely unprepared for. It just did not go where I was expecting more weirdness in a progressive sense. Whereas there's just a lot of really cool, like Men in Helicopters and Pretty Pink Rose and Looking for a UFO. Those are all like really good singles, really good choruses. And it was fascinating. So
yeah, it's hearing that he had an interest in drums starts to make a lot of sense to me in terms of his approach to guitar playing and production.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sophistication here and an understanding of rhythm that I did not expect to hear, because I was expecting to hear like, a guitar virtuoso eccentric type.
Right.
Right. Which usually like sacrifices rhythm for the sake of, let's just say like, I don't know, Joe Satriani, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think most Joe Satriani albums are known as being rhythmically brilliant. They're more melodically brilliant. And I think what he's bringing here is why I'm so usually gravitate towards guitar players who understand or play drums, is because these things happen, like what you're hearing on this record, where there's this appreciation for when not to play, how to use dynamics and rhythm playing, how to layer or how to use drums, how to layer percussion in the context of songwriting, how to build dynamics. I mean, there's just so many like amazing twists and turns that happen here. And like I mentioned earlier, often that's because of chord changes, but it's also the way that it rhythmically builds and develops and crescendos and accents to make all those moments possible. And I don't think you hear that on a sort of a guitar first album, you need a producer and or an artist who's like very savvy when it comes to rhythm.
Mm-hmm. Now, is there anything that doesn't work for you on the album?
Um, I don't love I Am What I Am. I think it's a fine it works as like an album break. It's right in the
Mm-hmm.
middle. Musically it's probably more what I expected the rest of the album to be like. Like if you
Mm-hmm.
played that track for me, like, okay, this is what I'm kind of expecting. Like music beds with, you know, interesting guitar sections and then vocals that are spoken word or some kind of samples or just, Um, so from a songwriting standpoint, I think it's, on the its place on the record is kind of a novelty and it's fine as a like an album kind of break reset. From a songwriting standpoint, I'm just so enamored by the other material that it just doesn't to me connect as much.
Right.
I would also say Phone Call from the Moon, just for whatever reason wasn't as compelled when he slowed the tempo down that much. I'm on board with the mid-tempo stuff that's in that, traveling Wilburys kind of vibe. I like the higher energy things. I think those work great. Where it's driving. When he really brings it down for that song, it's okay. It just didn't grab me like the others did. Um, so that's really it though. I mean, it's really interesting from a production standpoint too. It's hard to yeah, I guess some of it sounds like 1990, but it also could sound like, you know, just a really high quality 80s pop record. Um, it could also just sound like a modern like album too. It's a bit timeless, which was
Mm-hmm.
was another good surprise. I was expecting it to be a little bit more, with that 1990 91 kind of rock production that is a little polarizing now
Mm-hmm.
for me personally. It doesn't have that, which is another bonus. I suppose I would just say it sounds classic to me, you know. But these could be a lot of these if you just played them for me and told me they were ELO songs that I had never heard before or, were B-sides or something, I would probably
Mm-hmm.
believe you. They have that type of classic lush production to them.
Yeah.
So I can't even really knock it on the 1990 production, which I came in expecting to. So really, I think the only thing that doesn't work is just a couple of those songs are just weaker than the others. Anything not work for you?
Same. The two slow songs, Heartbeat, which is the King Crimson cover, and Phone Call from the Moon, they just dip into like this rock fusion sound a
Mm,
little bit that
yeah.
I've never really liked that. And I think when he's playing up tempo, you don't get that same vibe.
Yeah.
So I kind of ignore it if it's there. But when you, and maybe it's the use of, maybe he's using on those songs some sort of synthetic guitar stuff or synthetic bass or what have you. Um, that just didn't, those just didn't work for me. And as far as that, I Am What I Am, that should be 2 minutes, not 4 minutes. Like that to
Yeah.
me is the only issue. I
Yeah.
totally cool. It's cool. It's like number 5 track. It's right in the middle. But I would love it if it was just like 2 minutes and then maybe reprise it at the end of the last song as for like a minute, just to
Hmm.
tie the record back together. Um, but yeah, I didn't know what was going to happen going in. And from the first listen, my ears were like, whoa, what is this? Is such cool guitar stuff. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I've heard, I read some stuff about people saying he like, he's playing too much, or I don't feel like that. I feel like when he's
Mm-hmm.
doing crazy, crazy leads and things, like that's the fun of the chaos. Like these
Yep.
songs are actually really well written,
Yep.
very arranged really well. So when you add a little like chaos
Yep.
into that's fun, especially in
I
a
think
pop
that's what
song.
makes this different than some of the other, like a Jeff Lynne, which I mean, he did like lush Beatles like production and had his own little flavor on that, but he never did things that were, I would say, are weird. This has this layer of weird on it
Mm-hmm.
that is more to me like Bowie would would do. Bowie would like add a weird. That's why I think he liked a lot of these eccentric guitar players or creative guitar players because they could bring that to the music, and he did
Mm-hmm.
that even with his vocal, do some voices and things that were, really over the top. And it had to me it has that going on here where it's pop, but it's also just tickling that like oddity part of your brain of like, well, that's a strange thing to do, but it's kind of cool. And I didn't find it sometimes when artists do that, it becomes distracting. And
Yeah.
for whatever reason, I just went along with it here. Like it just seemed to fit and integrate itself well, but still offer that little extra flavor that made it stand out from just being, you know, a pop, an 80s pop song.
Yeah. And I do want to mention, like, he's a good lyricist.
Mm-hmm.
He has some really interesting ideas, um, especially in Men in Helicopters and Looking for a UFO, sort of questioning the world
Mm-hmm.
and just thought provoking, but not in a pushy, pushing in an agenda sort of way, just sort of questioning things,
Mm-hmm.
which is a really interesting thing for a guy who's known for being a guitar player to be able to pull off. Because sometimes you get those sorts of songs and they're kind of clunky. You're trying to write a song about like environmentalism and it'll be like really kind of lame. And
Mm-hmm.
you're like, oh, this, but he does a really good job of being thought provoking but subtle about it and not pushing too hard so that you get distracted. Just like interesting little lines here and there, and
He
always
asks
has
you
a hook.
he asks you to be curious and doesn't tell you the answer.
Yes.
And both of those songs I think are examples of like, hey, what if, and have you thought about, and maybe this is how they think about that, or if this happened, then maybe this would happen. What do you think? Like you're engaged in a conversation as opposed to like,
Mm-hmm.
this is how the world works and this is the answer. And if you don't believe this, you're right or wrong. I think that's what makes it work, which is super clever way to approach, right? Thought provoking, interesting topics that I think is also fascinating that were relevant in 1990 and are still relevant right now. Maybe more relevant now than they were
Oh,
in 1990.
yeah. I should make note because I didn't do this in the history. This is just one of those weird, wild, like, things. But remember the band Jars of Clay?
Yeah.
They had that big single Flood.
Uh-huh.
He produced that.
Uh,
He was the
oh,
producer of that
why not?
song.
Why
Why
not?
not? Just he ended up that it was two songs. He worked with the band on their debut album. Two songs he worked on were that was that one in Flood, which was the big hit. So because I'm curious, like, okay, this is a guy who's been a sideman. He's played on albums by bands that, I mean, King Crimson's famous, but they're not a band that's like sold 10 million albums per album release. You know what I mean?
No, no, no.
He's done a lot of touring. So I'm like, where does an income? What do you draw an income as a session guitar player and a touring musician? Well, you produce a huge single for a pop band, a pop acoustic band in the '90s, or
Yeah.
you play on a David Bowie huge single, or
Yeah.
another huge single, or Nine Inch Nails. Like that's such an interesting, weird. Like he's on the downward spiral. He's getting a credit. He's getting a, a performance penny here and there for the downward spiral and a bunch of other things. So yeah, this dude needs to have a documentary or a book. Like I need to know all about Mr. Adrian Belew. All right, so let's talk about our overall ratings on this record. Worthy album, better EP, or decent single? Where do you land?
This is a worthy album. I mean, I'm gonna be straight. This is one of the records. Um, I've heard this year we've reviewed that's really stood out. It's
Mm-hmm.
grabbed my attention and um want to know more and have very little criticism of it. Um, I think I'm with you even on like Heartbeat in that it definitely has that. I wrote like, to me, it sounded like a Toto song. Like it's sort of in this middle, like
Yeah,
non-offensive kind of radio rock, mid-tempo, slow song. But it's so well written. I was like, it's not my favorite song on the album, but damn, that's a good song.
yeah,
So I even gave that one, a thumbs up just because it was like, I can't. If Toto released that in 1986, it probably would have been a hit. And, uh, it sounds like King Crimson put it on one of their records during that era. So that makes sense. So I have very little criticism of this record. It's a lot of fun. And it makes me want to dig into his catalog a bit more. Although I have to admit, it's a bit daunting to know where to go. I suppose if this is an outlier, I don't know that I'll like as much of it as this, but I'm intrigued. Where'd you land?
oh, same. I think this is a worthy album. I think this is something that, like, when we talk about the most interesting discoveries that we've made over the years, this is going to be amongst those. Like, it's just a really cool and totally unexpected, out of left field record that we can never have predicted what is going to ever, show up for us, and then let alone be something that we enjoyed so much. It's such a breath of fresh air, to be honest. And again, this is right at the beginning of the 90s, so you don't have any influence of like him trying to write a grunge record or an alternative rock record. This is just pure, I'm going to do something different. People know me for being more progressive and doing a lot of work with progressive bands and artists. I'm going to make a pop record and do something unexpected, but I'm going to make a pop record that sounds like a Adrian Belew pop record, which is such an interesting place. And like you, I don't know where to really start. I'm hoping that there's maybe like a compilation that I could go through and start with there, like a best of, because I don't think he has. I mean, he probably has the greatest hits, but it's probably with a lot of other artists having those hits, and he's playing guitar on them, or some instrument on them.
Yeah, this from what I've seen, this album is not on streaming. Did you
Yeah,
see it anywhere?
no.
So I ended up getting it from Bandcamp. He's on Bandcamp selling directly all of his solo material. So if you want to
Mm-hmm.
pick it up, just pick it up on Bandcamp. But unfortunately, it looks like it's not on streaming. When I was digging around, I did see what appeared to be a compilation that had, I think it had the song Young Lions on it from this album. So it looks like there's maybe on streaming a compilation or two to start. I'm also intrigued by that Bears album now. I'm wondering if that is maybe in the vein of this. I know it's been bantered about on our Discord, but I haven't listened to it yet, so I might check that out.
Yeah, that's definitely now moving up my list of things when I have some free time here and there to go check out. So that's two worthy albums for Young Lions by Adrian Belew. It's difficult to track down, but you can find it there. It's not streaming on like a Spotify or what have you, but there are people who have uploaded it to, say, YouTube, so you can find tracks on there. I don't even know if the whole album is on there, but there are
Yeah.
songs on there that you can check out. So if who was our suggester on this? It was Mr. Keith Miller. Congratulations, Keith, on getting your picks suggested. Um, if you want to be like Keith, you can just go on over to digmeoutpodcast.com and suggest an album, drop in the name of the artist, the album, the year it came out. You can do this for not just 90s records, but also 80s metal records for our other podcast that we do with Chip Midnight that comes out every other week. 80s metal, although metal is a very wide and encompassing and disagreement laden term when it comes to what we cover, because some people are like, that's not metal, that's hard rock, or that's AOR or whatever, but it's all under the umbrella of metal, of loud guitars.
Think about your 1980s self. If you thought for a moment in the 80s that it was metal at the time, then go ahead and suggest it.
Exactly. If this episode brought back good memories and positive vibes, join us at digmeoutpodcast.com to explore our free archive of over 800 episodes, history of the band posts, and weekly new release roundups. If you'd like more, you can become a paid subscriber to unlock bonus podcast episodes covering 70s, 80s, and aughts rock, new release reviews, and access to our private Discord community. That's digmeoutpodcast.com. For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.
We invented you. Now we gotta live with you. You're more solid than a rock. A rock of cocaine or crack.